The hook goes into the monster's eye, and I don't even think about it. I just pull. 40 feet of rotting wood and rope, and I'm standing on top of it, screaming at a creature the size of a bus while it drags my entire home underwater. This is not how survival stories are supposed to go. In the stories, you build a raft, you catch a fish, you watch a nice sunset. Nobody warns you about the thing with 6 rows of teeth that decides your floating shack looks like a snack. My name is Finn Ashcroft. 6 weeks ago, I had a bed, a roof, and a life that made sense. Now I'm balanced on 3 planks of wood, soaked to the bone, holding onto a chain that's the only reason I'm not already dead. And somewhere below me, something the size of a house is deciding whether to eat me or my raft first. Here's the part that should be impossible. The hook in that monster's eye isn't just a hook. The second the barb sinks into flesh, I feel it. A pull. Not on my arm, inside my chest. Like something is being poured into me through the chain itself. And then, right there in front of my eyes, hanging in the air like it belongs there, words appear. Material absorbed. Leviathan hide. Rare. Raft upgrade available. I stare at that message for exactly 1 second before the monster slams its tail into the side of my raft and nearly throws me into the water. That's the part nobody would believe. That's the part that changes everything. And that's exactly where this story actually starts. 6 weeks earlier, none of this made any sense either. I was on a ferry. A normal, boring, overpriced ferry. Crossing water I don't even remember the name of anymore. Headphones in, half asleep, complaining internally about the Wi-Fi. Then the sky did something it shouldn't. No storm clouds, no warning. Just a green light that swallowed the horizon whole, and a sound like the entire ocean took one enormous breath in. I remember grabbing the railing. I remember someone screaming. I remember the deck tilting at an angle that should not have been survivable. And then, I remember nothing, until I woke up choking on salt water, alone, on a piece of the ferry's broken hull that had somehow held together just enough to float. No ferry, no passengers, no land in any direction, just gray water, gray sky, and me. That should have been the end of it. Drift for a day or two, run out of water, and that's the story. Except 3 hours into floating on a piece of broken wreckage, something washed up against my hand. A grappling hook, old, rusted at the edges, attached to a coil of chain that shouldn't have fit in the space it was floating in. It looked like something out of an antique shop, not something that belonged in the middle of an ocean that had apparently just eaten a ferry. I picked it up because it was the only solid thing within reach, and the second my hand closed around the grip, the world went quiet, not silent. Quiet in a different way, like something had been listening and had just decided I was worth paying attention to. System detected, host bound. Chain of infinite ascension, active. I said something along the lines of, "What the hell?" out loud, to nobody, because there was nobody. The words hung there anyway, glowing faint blue against the gray sky, like the ocean itself had installed an app on my eyeballs. I want to be honest with you. My first thought was not incredible, a magic power. My first thought was that I'd hit my head and this was a concussion talking. My second thought, about 4 seconds later, when the hook in my hand pulsed warm and a small readout appeared showing my raft integrity at 0%, was that whatever this thing was, it had opinions about my survival, and I should probably listen to it. So I did the only thing that made sense. I grabbed a floating piece of the ferry's railing, jammed the hook into it, and pulled. Material absorbed, ship timber, common, raft base constructed, and just like that, wood I didn't touch with my hands assembled itself under me, plank by plank, until I was standing on something that actually resembled a raft instead of a piece of garbage. I laughed, genuinely laughed, alone in the middle of an ocean that had just tried to kill me, because for the first time in hours I didn't feel like I was about to die in the next 10 minutes. That was mistake number 1. Feeling safe. The ocean doesn't like that. Here's what I figured out over the next few hours, piecing it together the way you do when you have nothing else to do but stay alive and think. This hook wasn't just a weapon, it was a converter. Anything I hooked and pulled toward myself with enough force got broken down and rebuilt as an upgrade to my raft. Wood became planks, rope became lashings, metal became reinforcement. It didn't matter what shape the object started in, the system decided what it was worth, and the raft grew. One hook, infinite upgrades. As long as I had something to grab, I had a way to build. The catch, and there's always a catch, was range and risk. The hook only worked on things I could physically reach and pull, which meant every single upgrade required me to go get something, drag it in, and hope whatever I grabbed onto didn't decide to grab back. I didn't know it yet, but that last part was going to become a real problem very fast. For the first 2 days it was almost peaceful. I hooked driftwood. I hooked a crate that had washed up half submerged, and it turned into storage space. I hooked a torn sail floating limp on the surface and watched, stunned, as threads rewove themselves into a patched canvas sheet that the system called a basic sail, functional. My raft went from a joke to something that actually looked like it might survive a light breeze. I started talking to the system like it was a person, because loneliness does that to you fast. I'd say things like, "All right, let's see what junk floats by today," and the readouts would just answer with numbers, cold and indifferent, like the ocean's most unhelpful customer service line. But it worked. And on a raft in the middle of nowhere, it works, is the only opinion that matters. Day 3 is when I realized I wasn't alone out here. I heard the engine before I saw the boat. A real motorboat, battered and patched with scrap metal, cutting a straight line through the water toward me. Part of me wanted to scream with relief. Rescue! Actual people! My brain went through exactly 1.5 seconds of hope before I noticed the way the boat slowed as it approached. Not the way you slow down to help someone, but the way you slow down to look at something you're deciding whether to take. 3 people on that boat. One of them, a wiry guy with a scar cutting through his eyebrow, called out first. "Nice raft," he said. Friendly voice, wrong eyes. "You mind if we borrow it?" I should have said no immediately. I should have reached for the hook right then. Instead, I made the mistake of hesitating, of trying to be reasonable with someone who clearly had already decided the conversation was a formality. That's when the second one, bigger, quieter, grabbed a boat hook of his own and swung it toward my raft's edge to pull it in close. Big mistake. The second his hook touched my raft's planking, my system flared awake, and something happened that not even I expected. A warning, sharp and red this time instead of the usual calm blue. Hostile claim attempt detected. Defense protocol available. I didn't even have time to ask what that meant. My chain moved on its own, faster than I could have swung it myself, and the hook shot out, wrapped around the boat hook mid-swing, and yanked. The man on the other end wasn't ready for how hard that pull actually was. He went face first into the water with a scream that had way more panic in it than dignity. For 1 full second, everyone froze, me included. Then the scarred one laughed, low and mean. "Interesting toy," he said. "We'll take that too." That was the moment I learned this world had rules I hadn't caught up to yet. Rule 1. Nice people don't survive long out here, because nice doesn't stop a knife. Rule 2. Whatever this hook was, other people wanted it, and they weren't going to ask politely a second time. They came at me together. I want to tell you I fought like some kind of action hero, calm and calculated, but the truth is I was terrified, soaked, exhausted, and running on nothing but instinct and a system that apparently had a temper. The chain lashed out again, this time toward the boat itself, hooking into the hull. The system chimed. Material evaluation, hostile vessel. Absorption available on full claim, full claim. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but in that split second, standing on a raft that had already saved my life twice, I understood one very clear thing. If I pulled hard enough, and won, their boat could become mine. So I pulled. The chain screamed with tension. The boat's hull groaned. The scarred man's eyes went wide with something that wasn't confidence anymore. "Cut the line," he shouted, but it was already too late, because the moment the strain hit its peak, a chunk of the boat's reinforced side tore free and came flying toward me, absorbed instantly into my raft structure with a burst of blue light. Material absorbed. Reinforced hull plating. Uncommon. Structural upgrade applied. The scarred man stared at the new metal plating now bolted seamlessly into the side of my raft, and for the first time, I saw actual fear cross his face. Good. About time somebody other than me felt that. They didn't stick around after that. The engine roared, the boat limped away with a hole in its side, and I was left standing there, heart hammering, hands shaking, staring at a raft that now had metal armor I definitely did not have an hour ago. I should have felt triumphant. Mostly I just felt sick, and tired, and very aware that I had just made enemies out of the first other humans I'd seen in 3 days. That should have taught me to be careful. It didn't, not completely, because 2 days later I found Iris. I heard her before I saw her, a voice, hoarse and cracking, calling out from a cluster of debris a few hundred yards off. I almost didn't investigate. Every instinct from the scarred man's boat told me that voices in the water meant trouble, but this voice didn't sound like a trap. It sounded like someone who had been screaming for help so long they'd nearly given up on anyone answering. She was clinging to a broken piece of hull, barely keeping her head above water, dark hair plastered across her face, lips a shade of blue I did not like at all. I didn't think. I just hooked the debris she was holding and pulled her in fast, faster than I probably should have, because the system's chain didn't care about being gentle. She hit my raft's deck, coughing up seawater, and the first thing she said to me, once she could breathe again, was, "You could have killed me pulling that hard." Fair point. Sorry, not sorry. She was alive. Her name was Iris, former marine biologist of all things, which honestly explained a lot once I got to know her, because she looked at every strange creature that surfaced near my raft, less like a threat and more like a fascinating research opportunity, which was going to get both of us killed eventually. She'd been adrift for almost a week after her own boat capsized in the same green light event that took my ferry. She had no system, no hook, no upgrades, just grit, a knife, and a stubborn refusal to stop swimming toward anything that looked like it might float. Having her on board changed things. Not just because 2 people surviving is easier than 1, though that part was true too. It changed things because she asked questions I hadn't thought to ask. "So this thing," she said, turning the hook over in her hands the first time I let her hold it. Careful, like it might bite. "It only reacts to you?" "Seems like it. And it grades what it absorbs. Common, uncommon, rare?" She looked up at me, sharp and thoughtful. "That's not random. That's a system built by something. Something that wanted this ocean to have winners and losers." I hadn't thought about it that way. I'd been so focused on staying alive day to day that I hadn't stopped to ask the bigger question. Who, or what, had turned an entire ocean into some kind of survival game, and why I was apparently one of the players holding a weapon everyone else wanted. We didn't get an answer that day. What we got instead was a storm. It came out of nowhere, the way storms in this ocean apparently always did. A wall of black clouds swallowing the horizon in minutes. Iris saw it first and went pale in a way that told me this wasn't her first storm out here, and it hadn't gone well the last time. "We need shelter," she said. "Real shelter, not this." She was right. My raft, for all its upgrades, was still open, still exposed, still one good wave away from throwing us both into water that would kill us in under 20 minutes at that temperature. I looked at the hook in my hand, then out at the storm rolling toward us, and made a decision that I'm still not sure was smart or just desperate. I started hooking everything in reach. Debris, driftwood, a torn tarp caught in the current, a broken barrel bobbing nearby. Every pull lit up the system with absorption messages, faster than I could properly read them, and the raft grew under my feet in real time. Walls rising, a low roof forming, gaps sealing themselves with material that shouldn't have fit together but somehow did anyway. Raft structure expanded. Shelter tier unlocked. We got the makeshift shelter closed just as the first real gust hit, and then the storm arrived in full, and it was nothing like the light rain I'd been imagining. The ocean turned violent. Waves slammed the raft hard enough to lift us off our feet even inside the shelter. Iris grabbed onto a support beam, knuckles white, and I grabbed the hook out of instinct, because somehow, holding it made me feel like I had at least a fraction of control over something that clearly did not care what I wanted. For almost an hour, we just held on. Water everywhere. Wind screaming through the gaps we hadn't managed to seal fast enough. At one point, the whole raft tilted so far I was sure we were about to capsize, and I remember Iris shouting something I couldn't hear over the wind, and me shouting back that we were fine, even though I had absolutely no idea if that was true. We survived. The raft held, battered, leaking in 2 places, but it held. And when the storm finally passed and the sky cracked open into a pale, exhausted gray, Iris and I just sat there in silence for a long moment, soaked and shaking, alive. "Your hook just saved both our lives," she finally said. "It's had practice," I said, and she actually laughed, a short, surprised sound, like she hadn't expected to still be capable of laughing after everything. That should have been the calm part of the story, the part where things settled down for a while before the next disaster. It wasn't. 3 days after the storm, we found the island. Or rather, the island found us, drifting slowly into view on the horizon like something that had been waiting the whole time. Not a natural island. You could tell that from a distance, from the 2 straight lines along its edges, the way structures jutted up from its center like the bones of something built, not grown. Iris went quiet the second she saw it. "That's not supposed to be here," she said. "There's nothing on any chart like that. We should have avoided it." Every instinct that had kept us alive this long was screaming that anything that unnatural in the middle of an unnatural ocean was a trap wearing the shape of a rescue. But we were low on fresh water, lower on food, and an island, real or not, was the first solid ground either of us had seen in weeks. Desperation makes bad decisions look reasonable. We anchored the raft in a hidden cove and went ashore. The island was quiet in a way that put my teeth on edge. Wrong quiet. The kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. Structures rose out of the jungle in broken, overgrown ruins, half swallowed by vines, but recent enough that scorch marks and rope ladders told me people had been here. Recently. That's when we found the camp. Abandoned in a hurry, from the look of it, supplies scattered, a fire still smoking faintly, no bodies, but no people either, and carved into a support post near the center of the camp, fresh enough that the wood hadn't even weathered yet. 3 words that made my stomach drop. "The Maw returns." Iris read it twice, out loud, like saying it again would make it make more sense. It didn't. "Whatever chased these people off," she said slowly, "did it recently. And it might still be close. I want to tell you we left immediately." We didn't, because right then, tucked half-buried under a collapsed section of the camp, I spotted something that made every survival instinct in my body light up at once. A stash. Reinforced crates, sealed tight, clearly built by someone who understood exactly what my kind of hook could do with good material. I should have known that finding something this valuable, this conveniently placed, after an ominous warning carved into wood, was exactly the kind of thing that gets people killed in every story ever told. I hooked the first crate anyway. The moment the chain connected and started pulling, the ground beneath us shuddered. Not an earthquake, something bigger, something alive, moving beneath the island itself, and Iris grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise. "Finn," she said, voice tight. "We need to go. Now." Too late. The water in the cove behind us erupted, and something rose out of it that made every previous danger in this story look like a warm-up. Scales the color of deep ocean storms, eyes like dead lanterns, a mouth wide enough to swallow the entire raft in a single bite, ringed with 6 rows of teeth that caught what little sunlight there was and turned it into something horrifying. The Maw had returned exactly on schedule, and it had decided we were the welcoming party. Here's where the story finally catches up to where it started. Me, standing on my raft, hook buried in the creature's eye, screaming, holding onto a chain that felt like it was trying to rip my arms out of their sockets. Iris was behind me, throwing anything not nailed down at the creature's face, buying seconds that felt like nothing. The system flared bright red, alarms stacking on top of each other faster than I could process. Critical threat detected. Full absorption unavailable. Target exceeds current tier. Warning, sustained contact may result in host death. Great. Just great. My magic survival hook, the thing that had turned scrap wood into armor plating, was telling me this monster was simply too much for it to handle. Helpful. Really helpful, considering I already had the hook lodged in its eye, and letting go now felt like an equally terrible option. The Maw thrashed, dragging the raft sideways through the water hard enough that Iris lost her footing and slammed into the new metal plating along the side. I heard her cry out, and something in me went cold and clear all at once. The kind of clarity that only shows up when there's genuinely nothing left to lose. I couldn't outpower this thing. Not yet. But I'd learned one thing about this hook over the last few days that maybe, just maybe, could save us both. It didn't just absorb objects, it absorbed connection points. Anywhere it latched on hard enough became, for a moment, part of my raft's system, and if I could find the right spot, one part of this creature small enough for the system to actually process, there. A cluster of smaller barbed spines running along its jaw, clearly weaker than the rest of its ancient hide. I ripped the hook free from its eye, ignoring the roar of pain that followed. and threw everything I had left into one final throw, straight at that cluster of spines. Material evaluation: Leviathan spine cluster, rare, partial absorption successful. The creature screamed, an awful, echoing sound that seemed to shake the whole cove, and reared back, thrashing wildly as a section of its own jaw armor tore free and slammed onto my raft's deck in a burst of light, reforming instantly into something new. A set of barbed spikes now jutting from the raft's front edge like a makeshift ram. It wasn't enough to kill the thing, nowhere close. But it was enough pain, enough sudden loss, that the maw did the one thing every monster this size eventually does when something finally proves it isn't an easy meal. It hesitated. That hesitation was all we needed. I grabbed the crate I'd hooked earlier, still miraculously intact, and screamed at Iris to hold on. The raft surged forward under a burst of speed I didn't know it had, powered by God knows what combination of upgraded materials, and we tore out of that cove with the maw's furious roar chasing us the entire way, until the open ocean finally swallowed the sound behind us. We didn't stop moving for hours. Neither of us said much. What was there to say? We'd survived something that, by every reasonable measure, should have ended the story right there in that cove. It was Iris who finally broke the silence, staring at the new spikes now fused into the raft's front edge, her voice quieter than I'd heard it since the day I pulled her out of the water. "That thing has a name," she said. A warning carved by people who'd already survived one encounter and still ran, and it just found out you're the first thing on this ocean that's heard it and lived to tell it. I didn't like where that sentence was going. Meaning? She looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met her, there was something in her expression that wasn't just fear. It was calculation. Respect, maybe, tangled up with dread. Meaning it's not going to forget you, she said. And whatever built this island, whatever left that warning, whatever this whole system actually is, I don't think we just survived an accident back there, Finn. I think we just passed the first real test. The system chimed one more time before either of us could say anything else. A message different from anything I'd seen before, glowing steady and cold against the darkening sky. Trial 1. Complete. Host survival confirmed. Next trial will begin when the host is ready. I stared at that message for a long time. Trial. Not accident, not bad luck. A trial, deliberately set, deliberately survived, with the calm, patient promise of another one waiting somewhere out there in all that gray water. Somewhere behind us, far off but not nearly far enough, the ocean rumbled with a sound that wasn't thunder. The maw wasn't done with me. And whatever, or whoever, was running this ocean like a game board had just confirmed I was a piece worth watching. I looked down at the hook in my hand, still humming faintly with leftover power, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I understood the real shape of what I'd been given. Not a lucky find, not a fluke. A weapon built for exactly this. For surviving things that were never supposed to be survivable. One pull at a time. Iris sat down beside me on the newly armored deck, exhausted, soaked, alive. "So," she said, staring out at the horizon where the maw's shadow had finally disappeared beneath the waves. "What's trial 2? I didn't have an answer. But somewhere out in that endless gray water, something already did, and it was only a matter of time before it came looking for us to find out. Draven's crossbow bolt is already in the air before I even register he's raised the weapon, and I only have half a second to decide whether the hook goes into the bolt or into him. I choose the bolt. Metal meets metal mid-flight, the chain snapping taut, and the bolt spins off into the water instead of into my throat. Behind me, Iris is screaming something about the left flank, and behind her, 3 more boats are closing the gap, engines roaring, and somewhere out past all of it, past the raiders, past the shouting, the water is starting to darken in a way I recognize now. A way that means something big is moving underneath us. That's the problem with this ocean. You survive one nightmare, and it just introduces you to a bigger one. My name is still Finn Ashcroft. 6 weeks and one very ugly encounter with something called the Maw ago, I had a normal life. Now I'm standing on a raft bristling with bone-white spikes and scavenged hull plating, hook slick with seawater, staring down a man who's spent the last week learning exactly how much my life is worth to the people willing to take it from me. That man has a name now. Draven. I didn't know it 3 days ago. I know it now because he introduced himself right before he tried to kill me, which felt almost polite, in a horrible way. But to explain how we got cornered between an armed crew and open water crawling with things that eat rafts for fun, I have to back up. Because this didn't start with Draven. It started with a light. 2 days after the maw let us go, and I use the word let generously, because I don't think anything that big actually loses a fight, it just decides you're not worth finishing. Iris and I were still running on fumes and adrenaline, patching holes in the hull with whatever scraps the hook hadn't already claimed. That's when we saw the light. Not the green light. Not the one that ate my ferry and rewrote the rules of the entire ocean. This one was smaller, softer, a pale gold glow bobbing on the horizon like a lantern someone had forgotten to blow out. "That's not natural," Iris said, the way she said most things that turned out to be a massive understatement. "We should have avoided it. At this point, you'd think I'd have a rule carved into the side of my raft. See something strange, sail the other way. But curiosity on this ocean isn't a character flaw. It's a survival trait. You don't get upgrades by playing it safe, and by then, I already understood that the hook rewarded exactly the kind of decisions that should get you killed. So we sailed toward the light. It turned out to be a beacon. Not metal, not wood, something in between, smooth and faintly warm to the touch, floating upright in the water with no visible support, humming low like it was thinking. The second I got close enough, my system flared to life on its own, without me touching anything. Broadcast node detected. Trial 1 footage available for review. I stared at those words for a long 3 seconds before I understood what they meant, and when I did, my stomach dropped straight through the deck of the raft. "Footage," I said out loud. "It has footage." Iris went very still beside me. "Footage of what?" I already knew. I reached out, stupidly, I'll admit that now, and touched the beacon's surface, and the air above it split open into a screen of pale light, and there I was. There we both were, me on the deck, hook buried in the maw's eye, screaming. Iris throwing debris at a creature the size of a building. The whole worst night of my life, replaying in perfect, humiliating detail for an audience of who knew how many. "Someone's watching us," Iris said slowly. "Someone's been watching us the entire time." That was bad enough on its own. What made it worse was the counter ticking quietly in the corner of the projection. A number. Climbing. Slowly, but climbing. Viewers. 1,847. 1,800 people. Watching me nearly get eaten by a sea monster like it was the best thing on television. And I didn't know yet whether that number meant admiration, or a target painted on my back the size of the ocean itself. I got my answer 3 days later, and it came with a crossbow. We'd been keeping our distance from other rafts since the incident with the first crew, the ones who'd tried to take my raft before they even knew what the hook could do. I figured word might travel. I figured wrong about how fast. The first sign of trouble was smoke on the horizon. Not fire smoke, engine exhaust, thick and black, the kind of smoke that comes from someone pushing a motor way past what it was built for. Iris spotted it before I did, because she'd started keeping watch in shifts, ever since the storm taught both of us that this ocean punished anyone who got comfortable. "Boats," she said. Plural. I counted 4 by the time they were close enough to make out details. 4 boats, reinforced with the same kind of scavenged plating my own raft wore now, which told me something ugly before anyone even opened their mouth. Whoever these people were, they'd been absorbing trial materials too, just like me, just weaker. The lead boat cut its engine 100 yards out, and a man stood up at the bow, and even from that distance I recognized the scar cutting through his eyebrow. Him, from day 3. The one who'd called my raft a nice toy right before I nearly took his boat apart. "Small world," I muttered. "Or a small ocean with a very efficient rumor mill," Iris said, not taking her eyes off the approaching boats. He didn't waste time with pleasantries this round. No offers to borrow anything. He just raised his voice across the water, calm, almost friendly, the way people get right before they do something violent. "Name's Draven," he called out. "You made an impression last time we met. Figured we should get properly introduced before I take that hook off your corpse. Great. Just great." Apparently getting your boat gutted by an amateur with a magic grappling hook doesn't teach humility. It teaches obsession. "I don't want to fight," I called back, which was true, and also completely useless, because men like Draven don't listen to that sentence. They just hear it as confirmation that you're scared. "Course you don't," he said, almost gently. "Nobody who's smart wants a fight they think they'll lose. Problem is, I've spent the last 3 days watching footage of you nearly dying to something the size of an apartment building, and you know what I noticed? You're not that strong yet. You're just lucky. And luck runs out. Iris grabbed my arm. He's seen the broadcast too. Of course he had. Of course everyone had. 1,800 viewers wasn't just an audience. It was a leaderboard. And apparently, I'd just placed myself right at the top of it, wearing a target the exact shape of my own survival. The 4 boats began spreading out, slow and deliberate, boxing us in against open water on one side and a long stretch of reef-choked shallows on the other. Not an accident, a pincer. These people had planned this. They're not here to talk, Iris said quietly. No, I agreed. They're here to collect. That's when Iris did something I didn't expect. In the middle of an unfolding ambush, with 4 boats closing in and a man named Draven grinning at us like this was the best afternoon of his life, she reached into the small waterproof pouch she always kept clipped to her belt and pulled out something I'd never seen before. A notebook, waterlogged, half its pages fused together, but a notebook. Not exactly the moment, I said. It might be the only moment, she said, flipping fast through swollen pages. I need you to hear this before anything else happens, because if it goes wrong out here, I don't want to be the only one who knows. That got my attention faster than Draven's crossbow had. Before the green light, she said, words coming quick now, urgent. I was part of a research team studying deep anomalies, temperature spikes that didn't match any known current, readings that made no scientific sense, energy signatures with no source. 3 days before the event, we picked up something in the water that looked almost like code. Not sound, not light, structured, deliberate. Structured how? Like a countdown, she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the last word. I thought it was equipment failure. I logged it as equipment failure. I didn't think, she stopped. Swallowed. I didn't think it meant this, that the system, the trials, the architect, whatever's actually running this ocean, I think it was already active before the light ever hit us. I think we didn't get pulled into something new. I think we got pulled into something that had already been running for a long time. The world didn't stop for that reveal, because the world doesn't care about your emotional beats when there are 4 boats 50 yards out and closing. But something in my chest went cold and sharp at the same time, because if Iris was right, then none of this, not the hook, not the trials, not the maw, was some accident of the green light. It was designed, on purpose, by something patient enough to be running tests before it even announced itself. We'll talk about this, I said, when we're not about to get boarded. Deal, Iris said, snapping the notebook shut and shoving it back into the pouch like it was the most normal thing in the world to reveal a conspiracy mid-ambush. Draven's boat crept closer, and this time when he called out, there was less patience in his voice. Last offer, kid. Hand over the hook, walk away with your life and your girl, or we find out exactly how tough that magic toy of yours actually is. I looked at the hook in my hand, then at Iris, then at the 4 boats, and past them at the open water beyond, where the light was catching the surface in a way that made my skin crawl, because I'd learned by now that open water on this ocean wasn't empty. It was just waiting. Here's the thing nobody warns you about power. Once you have some, everyone assumes you have more than you do. Draven thought I was strong because I'd survived a monster 3 times my size. He didn't know how close that survival had actually come to being a funeral. He didn't know the system itself had warned me I was outmatched. All he'd seen was the highlight reel. I decided, in that moment, that his mistake might be the only advantage I had. You want to see what the hook does? I called back, letting my voice carry every ounce of confidence I absolutely did not feel. Come find out. Iris shot me a look that said several things at once, none of them polite, but she didn't argue, because there wasn't time to argue. Draven's boat surged forward, and the other 3 followed, and the pincer that had been slowly closing snapped shut all at once. The first attacker came from my left, a wiry man with a spear hook of his own, clearly upgraded, clearly built from something he'd absorbed the same way I built mine. He swung it toward the raft's edge, aiming for the same trick that had cost his crew a chunk of their boat last time. I wasn't about to let that happen twice. I hooked his weapon mid-swing and pulled, hard, and this time the system didn't hesitate. Material evaluation, upgraded spear hook, uncommon. Absorption available. His weapon tore free of his hands and slammed into my raft's deck, dissolving into the structure with a burst of blue light, and he stumbled forward off balance, cursing, right as a second boat rammed the side of mine hard enough to nearly throw Iris off her feet. "Behind you!" she shouted. I spun in time to see a third attacker vaulting onto my deck, a knife in hand, moving fast, the kind of fast that comes from doing this more than once before. I didn't have time to hook him. I barely had time to raise my arm before the blade came down, and the only reason it didn't open my forearm was that Iris slammed into him from the side with the full weight of her body, sending both of them sprawling across the deck in a tangle of limbs and cursing. "A little warning next time," I shouted at her, hauling the attacker off her and shoving him hard toward the water. "You're welcome," she snapped back, already scrambling up, blood on her lip, eyes blazing with something that looked less like fear now and more like fury. Draven's boat pulled alongside, close enough now that I could see his face clearly, the scar, the calm, calculating eyes, the crossbow already reloading in his hands. "Not bad," he called out, almost admiring. "But you're fighting 4 boats with 1 raft and 1 extra pair of hands." "That math doesn't favor you, kid." He wasn't wrong. And that's exactly when the water beside his boat rippled in a way that had nothing to do with any of us. I felt it before I understood it. A pressure change in the air, a stillness that spread outward like something enormous had just decided to pay attention. My system flared with a warning I recognized immediately, and hated immediately, because I'd seen it once before and it had nearly ended me. Anomalous presence detected. Threat signature elevated. Raft absorption rate has exceeded safe threshold. Proximity warning issued. "What does that mean?" Iris said, reading the panic on my face before I'd said a word. "It means," I said slowly, watching the water darken in a wide, spreading shadow beneath Draven's boat, "that every upgrade I've pulled into this raft over the last 2 weeks has been sending out some kind of signal, and something big just heard it." Draven's crew felt it too. I watched 2 of them go pale at once, watched the confident sneer slide right off Draven's face as the water beneath his boat shifted, subtle but unmistakable, like something enormous was gliding just beneath the surface, curious, patient, and very, very hungry. "That's not the same one," Iris whispered. "Please tell me that's not the same one." I didn't know. I genuinely didn't know, and in that moment it didn't matter, because whatever was down there, it was big enough to make 4 armed boats and 1 desperate raft all equally irrelevant. "New plan," Draven called out, voice tight now, all the swagger gone. "We finish this fast, or we don't finish it at all." That's the part I still can't quite believe, looking back. In the middle of an ambush meant to strip me of everything I had, the ocean itself decided to remind all of us exactly how small we were. 4 boats, 1 raft, and something vast and patient circling beneath us all, deciding which one of us looked most like dinner. I looked at the open water past Draven's crew. Clear, fast, my only real path away from 4 armed boats. And then down at the darkening shadow spreading beneath us. And understood, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful in how simple it was, that I had exactly 2 options left, and both of them were terrible. I could turn the fight toward Draven's crew, use the chaos of the creature's presence to strike while they were distracted and scared, and pray the shadow beneath us lost interest before it decided we were worth surfacing for. Or I could run for open water, away from the boats, straight toward whatever was casting that shadow, and gamble that speed alone could outrun something I couldn't even see yet. Fight the people who wanted to kill me for what I carried, or run toward the monster that didn't care what I carried at all, only what I tasted like. Iris grabbed my arm, her voice low and urgent, eyes fixed on the widening shadow beneath the water. "Finn, whatever you're about to decide." Decide fast. The shadow surged, closer now, fast enough that even Draven's crew stopped aiming their weapons at me and started aiming them at the water instead. And somewhere beneath all 4 boats and my own raft, something vast and patient finally began, slowly, unmistakably, to rise.